In 2012, we had a situation in Detroit that was really what I consider to be a crisis of the community. And that is, the citizens of Detroit did not know exactly what their future was. There was a risk financially, there was a risk in terms of leadership. They had elected officials, but there were chances that there would be an emergency manager, that they would have little or nothing to say about how the person was assigned here. And while all of that was going on, all of the talk radio show programs, all of the television programs were talking, but it seems as though they were talking above the heads of the people. The people had no participation in the dialogue about them and their community. And a former member of City Council and I got together and said, wouldn't it be great if we created a forum whereby the people of the city could talk to each other about their own lives, and that they could give each other reassurance or feedback on what they should be saying to their leaders about the future of the city. And that led us to create something that we later called Citizen Detroit, and the forum itself was called Dinner and Dialogue. We would invite people to come to sessions, they would have dinner and start talking informally to each other, and then we would have them break out at tables to discuss topics, everything from safety and of the police and of the school system and of transportation and sanitation, all of the topics that people talk about and have stress about every day. They would have an opportunity to come together and dialogue with each other about it. And that's what the whole purpose of this program was, and that's how it continues to this very day. Just a few years ago, Detroit stood on the brink of financial disaster. From 2005 to 2012, the Detroit School District had closed 130 schools due to shrinking enrollment and dilapidated buildings. By some estimates, the city of Detroit's total debt exceeded $19 billion. It was clear that the city needed a new direction, and its citizens needed to be more involved. Detroit citizens needed a program that would increase their knowledge of Detroit finances in order to be involved in the solutions and not just be spectators.
But there is a 1961 Time magazine article that was titled "Michigan in Decline," focusing on the city of Detroit. Basically, in that article, when I read it the first time, I literally thought it had just been written. Except I came across the term Negro. I thought, has time lost their mind? And then I looked back and went, oh my goodness, this was written in 1961. Policymakers in the private sector, in the public sector, have known. And there has been a process of kicking the can down the road. Well, as Councilman James Tate said, there's no more road and there's no more can. So this city council, this mayor, us as members of this community are faced with dealing with the situation. We can't look for kick the can down the road solutions any longer, and we need to create a conversation rooted in facts.
I believe that the citizens of Detroit care about the democracy. I think that people have become apathetic because of past decisions and past actors, and so you feel so disheartened. You've had people who have disinvested, so you don't feel the need to invest in terms of making that vote just because of broken promises in the past.
I think engagement starts with having the population that you want to be engaged feel included in a process. I feel like a lot of people who tend to not vote and tend to not be involved civically don't necessarily feel engaged with the system.
I believe that community involvement is lacking everywhere in the country, in the state, and because of that, we don't see numbers or turnouts that we would like to see on Election Day.
Sometimes people don't see a direct impact in marking something on a ballot and then the impact in their day-to-day life. Sometimes people don't understand the issues. And so that's, I think, where Citizen Detroit is so valuable, is because you take these complex issues and then you are having discussions about them on a neighborhood level, and then people can really understand what's going on and be able to understand, the issues.
I would think that regular voter participation is not higher because people don't understand what's happening and they're not engaged in the regular day-to-day city operations. So it's not their first priorities.
Right here in Citizen Detroit, you have the opportunity to see what's important to people in the 5th district, in the 2nd district, in the 1st district. And a lot of times those issues are very different. People closer to downtown with the younger demographic care a little bit more about education, whereas people in my district, in the 5th district, care a little bit more about blighted homes and blighted communities. Had it not been for Citizen Detroit, you don't really get to understand and appreciate the different public policy concerns that people have going on in their community.
The idea of democracy is right now about representation, not about participation. So I think it's going to be really important for existing Detroiters and new Detroiters to participate in this idea of citizenship. What their role is, what the government's role is, what the proper checks and balances look like.
In 2012, I had the opportunity to meet with a former member of the Detroit City Council, Sheila Cockrell, to talk about citizen engagement, and we came up with a great idea.
We began with the budget exercise, wanting people to really understand what was in the city budget and how hard it was to make choices. So we did activities that had people being, if you were mayor and council, what would you do about divvying up of city resources? We went through emergency management, through the bankruptcy, to the plan of adjustment, giving people a factual framework as to the city's economic condition.
Citizen Detroit is an excellent model of exercises that we perform with the residents and citizens of the city of Detroit. Typically, we present extraordinarily well-researched information about particular items. It could be city services, it could be the budget, it could be public schools systems, it could be police department issues.
We've had events from 25 people for private events where we'll go to their actual location, so that's scheduling for a smaller component of people, to actually even our standard dinner and dialogue events, which consist of approximately 75 to 125 people.
Citizen Detroit provides factual data and information about the realities of these situations, how they came to be, and then we will put the citizens through interactive exercises in the form of games, we call them, but they have so many purposes. One is to give citizens from each council district an opportunity to interact with one another, discuss the information that is presented to them, and then on game boards, prioritize or select priorities that represent their opinion and how things could be handled.
I really would love for the citizenry to get a better understanding of how much it truly costs to run government. And the expectations that we generally have can far exceed the practicality of the results that we're able to deliver generally. So it would be good for the community to get a good consensus or a good understanding of the resources that it actually takes to run a school. What does it take to hire teachers, to hire police officers and firefighters, and to turn on the lights. It's one thing to kind of hear the sound bites, but when you actually get an opportunity to drill down in the numbers, it really changes your perspective on things, especially when you consider any additional services that need to be rendered probably will lead to additional tax dollars from you. So when you put that all into perspective, you generally get a better understanding of what the real priorities of a community are.
I think obviously the civic and political issues in the city of Detroit are as important or more important than any other city in the nation, but I don't think many citizens feel that their vote translates into action. So I think programs like Citizen Detroit really help bridge that gap and show how being involved in your community and voting and becoming active can make a difference in day-to-day life.
One of the things that is so interesting about Citizen Detroit, and I should state that it was my husband Leon Lilly that brought it to my attention, and both of us are very interested in structures and vehicles that enable people to come together across different groups, ideologies, racial groups, and experiences and say, how do we make our community better? And so what I find intriguing that Citizen Detroit has been able to do is to bring that kind of diversity to the table, give us tools, give us exposure to some different information. I love the use of data to enable us to think more deeply about the stories and the experiences that we're seeing.
In our early sessions, we had the event split up into two main parts, a factual presentation followed by a group activity at district-based tables. So we presented on how Detroit ended up in bankruptcy, one of the key points being that our elected leaders continued to not pay our debt obligations. And so by the time of the group activity, when participants had to decide how to manage the city's budget, are we going to pay for fixed costs? How much are we going to put towards debt obligations? How much are we going to put towards city services? They knew how important it was to put towards fixed costs. And so they got to see what City Council had actually budgeted and then make their own decisions. And we saw them really struggle with that decision and see how hard it is to know you have to pay fixed costs and then have to cut your budgets for lighting or trash pickup or rec departments.
It's more a fun game experience where you either take on the role of, say, city council, or you actually do an actual game board style format that allows you to really get interactive, and it's just a great way to learn. And then so you're not just learning and gaining information, but you're actually having a good time while you're doing it.
I think it's important that we as individuals that do vote, that we bring someone along and involve them also to show them how important it is. It could be attending forums, showing how their participation makes things happen in Detroit.
I think a lot of it may also depend on familial culture, whether or not members of your immediate family, even folks in your neighborhood, your extended community, whether or not there's a push for voting, and how much you feel the local issues really impact you, and whether or not you feel that your voice is heard and valued with regard to your specific community.
I think residents don't get an opportunity enough to talk about the things that, impact them on a daily basis. Things like the bankruptcy, things like, the restructuring, all of that, you read about it on the news, you see about it on TV, and having the opportunity to sit down and really have a full-out discussion about how that impacts the city and impacts you as a resident, I think is extremely beneficial.
We brought people together because we wanted them to talk to each other, but we had to explain to them what it was that they were going to do, and it was a little confusing for them at first. You really want to hear my opinion? You want me to talk to my neighbors about this? So it was fascinating just to see what they thought they were going to do when they came to one of our dinner and dialogue sessions. But when we threw the topic out on the table, they really just jumped right in and started talking and got pretty heated discussions with each other.
And it was not up to the charter school system, it was the public school system that was controlling it all.
Well, that's not exactly true, because under the charter system, what they're doing is that they go to places like Eastern Michigan University and they get a charter from them to operate a school. Then they have their own superintendent and their own board of directors in each of these charter schools. And they are virtually unregulated. They are unregulated by any entity.
If we pay a percentage, whatever we don't pay, penalties, we get penalties with interest. So keep that in mind, council members, that if we don't pay our claims, that the judge will levy interest rates on those settlements.
Okay, why can't we reduce that and enter into a contractual agreement with the county and have the inmates cut those parks like they do on the free labor? Right. like they do on the freeway and various areas. So why can't we reduce it?
You can reduce it and assume that you can do something like that. It may or may not work. In which case you'll have parks overgrown or not maintained.
Okay. On healthcare, we should have spent 1.8. We didn't budget anything for that. We're gonna transfer those costs to people who live in the city in the next 5 or 10 years and have them pay for the cost of present employees and those who are retired.
So all we need is another 150,000 at the bottom.
You take it out of city council, take those cars away and all that. We don't took that down. We don't cut it in half. Some of yourself.
During the dinner and dialogue sessions, we asked the representatives to report what their groups had discussed and decided.
Also down health and recreation, the offering of free health clinics.
So our first priority was to lease Belle Isle and then lease the water and sewage.
We also had clusters in job attraction and neighborhoods and housing around the number of homes in foreclosure and the tons of illegal dumping removed. That was something we had a lot of discussion about.
We all want to cease the arson problem here. We all want to ensure that our police respond to the things to which they should be responding. And we want to make sure, like the previous group, that we can get where we're going when we need to get there, so that if we ever get a job, we can get there when we need to.
So it's good to be able to come out to these meetings and give them the information that they were unaware of. And I love to hear when they have issues. I don't look at it as complaints because it always can be resolved. But when we don't know what your issue is, we like to hear it, and we do not shy away from it at all. You know, I complained to the officers, nothing happened. I didn't even know I had a neighborhood police officer. I didn't know this and that. It's fine that you didn't know before, but now that you do know, we can move forward. So I think this was awesome. I love the game and I love the dialogue.
Why do you think that was important?
The infant mortality rate? Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that it speaks to the health of the children, our next generation, right? And they're the ones that are going to lead us, and then we have to make sure that they're healthy. And so if they're not healthy, that means that we're not healthy.
People are hungry, are thirsty to get factual data from sources that they trust.
So we're going to go from what you see in the neighborhood to the Detroit city government to the budget exercise. That's what we're going to tie together. So that's kind of the environment that you have to allocate this money within.
I mean, these are high-performance voters who've never lived anywhere else. Pretty much, this is their city. So, you know, when you talk about privatizing services or consolidating cities, I mean, this is really passionate talk. When you talk about losing jobs, you know, these are passionate issues. But I think with the cameras being off in a sense, you know, I think people were very civil, and they understood at the end of it that democracy and the majority would rule at the end of the day.
The next thing that became a critical set of issues was, well, if we know all this, how do we use this information to evaluate what people who come before us and say, I want to be your representative? What do we do with the information to connect it to the decisions about who we choose to support or not support for elective office? So what we've done with the incredible support of the Knight Foundation is create a set of tools that help residents evaluate political speech. And this notion that you have to listen critically to people when they talk to you as a candidate. And here's a framework. Understand that there are different kinds of political statements. There's pertinent statements, there's pot shots, there's good pivoting and bad pivoting. There's these different ways to listen to language.
Our first candidate is candidate Cynthia. And our question for candidate Cynthia is, what would you do to increase employment in the city of Detroit?
My name is Cynthia Cockrell, retired from Detroit Public Schools after 42 years. First of all, who here is a McKinsey grad? All right then, class of 68 here. Anybody from the west side? Now, all right now, you know I love you, you're my people. East Siders, I love you too. Thank you. Good job, did you do a good job?
was pandering.
Yes. Okay. The front half of that response didn't really have anything to do with the question. I was trying to get some relatedness. And then when she did respond to the question, it was maybe things that are out of her control in that office. So for this kind of question, you might ask, well, could you clarify what strategies or programs you would use to hire every unemployed person in Detroit, as you suggested?
In 2015, we decided that it was time to bring the citizens of Detroit and the leaders or the future leaders of Detroit together to talk about the problems. Many times these were candidates. These candidates were taking positions on important issues to the citizens of this city. But again, they were doing it without getting any feedback. So we thought we could create the next phase of Citizen Detroit, which turned out to be town halls, in which we would have the politicians come and talk and speak to specific topics that we wanted them to address, and then to have the citizens, those who had been participating in Citizen Detroit, to ask them questions.
We have to be able to do as leaders on city council is identify folks who may be stakeholders, who have not gotten the luxury of being brought to the table. Because a lot of times who a stakeholder is or isn't depends on who they know, where they are, what they're connected to. And sometimes the people most affected are not called stakeholders.
There's no secret that we must invest in city operations to ensure growth and development. And we certainly have to invest in the citizens of Detroit and their health and well-being. I didn't choose the rainy day fund because, let's face it, we are 1 foot outside of bankruptcy, and we all know that. So at this point, we have to just continue doing what we've been doing, which is being fiscally responsible and financially savvy about how we move the city forward.
So now I've got the bus drivers. And the bus drivers are being paid $2 or $3 an hour less than the bus drivers at SMART. They're working just as hard, if not harder, and they want to be paid the same. And I have to say to them, and I do these union negotiations myself, I sit down and I said, look, I wish I could pay you the same, you deserve it. But we're not going to run a deficit. And so the Amalgamated Transit Union, the ATU, the drivers union, I said, but here's what I'll do. We'll give you the raises we can afford, but if the system grows, we'll share the money with you. I said, here's what we'll do. We'll take all the money that goes into the fare box, and anything that we gain going forward, because our budget didn't assume fare box revenue went up, anything we gain going forward, I'll give a quarter of it back to the bus drivers in bonuses every year. So if we get more riders, we treat people better, the service is on time, you'll share in the upside. And our driver said, that's fair.
And then we created a format for engagement with candidates that I know I've gotten really positive feedback from both residents and from candidates. Part of the culture of Citizen Detroit is that we are absolutely nonpartisan. We are categorically fair. There's no thumb on any scale at all. So candidates quickly became comfortable in coming to Citizen Detroit events, that they weren't going to get blindsided, that they were going to be treated fairly, they were going to get their opportunity to be heard in their own voice.
My name is Councilman Scott Benson. I'm your 3rd District City Councilman. I have focused in the last 3.5 years, this has been my platform the entire time I've been there, has been jobs, crime prevention, as well as blight elimination. In the 3rd District, we've been successfully able to bring over 1,000 jobs and $150 million in development, and that's directly into the neighborhoods.
Education, I have the Infinite Scholarship. I bring colleges here to Detroit. We give out scholarships to our Detroit students, trying to get them in colleges.
As a principal, as a teacher, and as a reading supervisor. And speaking of reading, as reading supervisor, that is my passion. That's what I really think we need to focus on, is high academic standards based on a good reading program, research-based.
I think I'm the only council member that goes out and door knocks over 5,000 doors on an annual basis to make sure, again, that you have resources and information in your communities. And in terms of equity, when we talk about economic development, it's not community versus development. It has to be one and the same.
My number one issue is making sure that our youth have a voice. And not only a voice, but making sure that they are involved along with the community in every decision that we make as a school board.
I'm a problem solver, a fixer, but also a fighter. All of you in here, I'm sure, are voters in the city of Detroit. All of the voters in the city of Detroit know that our voting process did not serve us last year and has not served us for a number of years.
North of 6 Mile are the haves. South of Puritan, over to Finkel, and even over to Linden are the have-nots. I can join those two districts together. I want to open an office in the area of the have-nots, which was where I was educated and where I lived. And I want to do something.
And we created the speed dating structure where candidates would move from table to table to engage with residents, organized primarily by their council district, to talk to the candidates.
I do hope that this board represents a diverse set of experiences and backgrounds, and that the voice and perspective of an educator will be present on the board. So if I'm elected, I will often look to that person who represents the educators for their areas of expertise.
I think we need to take a look at some of the other areas around the country where school systems in urban areas are thriving, and kind of pick from what they do as far as an academic curriculum perspective and make sure that we're infusing some of that stuff into what we do.
When I think about classroom sizes, I think about it the same way that you do when you look at a university, when they give you that student-to-teacher ratio. So I think about how do we make sure that there are enough staff, that there's enough support in the classroom so that students are getting the individualized attention that they need.
Leadership in Detroit, but across urban centers across the country, have to get to the ground. They have to get to the source of the issues. And I think historically you might have found that in the Black church, but in a lot of ways, different media outlets, online, social media, has replicated that type of spokesmanship that you saw. And so getting as close as you can to those sources is going to be the prerequisite of leadership, because you can't lead what you don't know.
I do not believe the current legislation will have a positive impact on education, because you're still not attacking the root causes, poverty, disenfranchisement, employment. Those are the things that you have to address in order to address education, because if a young student is coming from an environment where mom is maybe working several jobs, dad may be working several jobs, maybe unemployed, and even if he is in the household, they're having to face barriers before they even get to school that won't allow for them to take advantage of the education that is in place. And if the education isn't in place when you get there and you're going from one curriculum to the next, to the next, to the next, how will a student ever catch up? Next thing you know, they're seniors in high school and they may or may not be at reading level, and they're out the doors and they don't have anything to show for the time that they spent in the schools. Is it their fault? No, it's their children. It's the people who are involved in making the policy and setting the processes in place that will affect them more than anything else, in my opinion.
I think that from a state perspective, there are a lot of state leaders in the Senate or the State House and departments who look at government as very much like a business and a balance sheet. And I think that there is too much of an emphasis placed on how do we save money, how do we balance budgets. Examples like the state emergency manager law being at the forefront of that kind of attitude. And I think that it's very short-sighted, and I think that there is a disconnect, or at least a distance called, well, our responsibility from the state is just to balance these budgets. You know, if I'm from a different part of the state and I'm in the state legislature, my children aren't going to these schools. The people that elect me aren't going to these schools. So there isn't that pressure, I think, to produce a quality product or to see the people who are, going to these schools on a daily basis.
In terms of public education, I believe a third grade teacher could run this system better than any PhD, because they know hands-on what the kids need. And too much politics, and as with anything that's happening in Detroit now, it's always follow the money. So that's going to create not an education environment, but a money-making opportunity.
Oh, the accountability that people expect of the leaders of the city, I think that they've always had a high accountability of what they thought should be going on as far as the leaders in the city. It hasn't always happened, but I think people always have had that idea that, yes, the people who we've elected should be fulfilling their obligations for the position that they're elected for.
It's important to understand the financial catastrophe that DPS has been. However, it's really important to understand why that's happened. And when we make decisions about borrowing, or when we make decisions about our leadership, it's important to understand whether they have the capacity, the knowledge, and the capability to make intelligent and thoughtful decisions that will ensure we don't end up here 20 years from now. So I think with the concept of being empowered with knowledge, it really becomes the personal responsibility to make sure that we elect the right type of leadership.
We've held events with young students, and we continue to try to build that into the future. It's like learning a language. If you start studying it when you're in elementary school or in daycare, it's much easier to speak that language. If we can get people to engage in democracy in their high school or junior high school or elementary school or community clubs, then it will become a natural part of what they do later in life as voters. We used to teach civics in school, so people learned how to be good citizens, understand what good citizenship was. Many of those courses are no longer offered in the school system. It's now expected that you have greater communications through television, through social media, that you will learn these things, but it does not necessarily follow. They get a lot of information, but it's misinformation. So it's very important to get to young people early, to get them to think about their democracy and to think about their representative as they think about elections.
People understand the money that comes in and the money that goes out. They understand basically about borrowing, and pretty much they understand you can't borrow your way out of a deficit. So the basic concepts are applicable to their household budget, and what we try to do, particularly with the younger folks that we talk to, is talk about budgeting, talk about how much money is coming in, talk about the wise way to plan to spend that, and what happens when those plans go awry.
This is where you're going to make your decisions. You'll see here that these are the fixed costs that we were talking about. See these big red X's? They're there because of the bankruptcy. Those are things that no longer have to be considered by the mayor and council because they were addressed in some manner in the bankruptcy. So here are the things, the fixed costs that Betty talked about.
The fire department should get a lot too because they're helping.
But what got me about both public service departments, the police and the firefighters, is the fact that we don't have residential obligations for them. So you work in the city, we're paying you to help our city, but are you helping us to the fullest extent? Because I mean, you don't even live here. You can just say you're policing this.
We can't touch this.
We can't touch this or this.
We can't touch these two.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else is good. But our strategy was to lay out all the money on how it originally was, and then from there start swapping and taking. So for police, instead of giving them $200,000, we gave them $100,000, and we took from court cases and settlements.
We paid off all our required debts. So I think that $3.5 million, we actually just stuck with our fixed costs. And then we gave our staff agencies $1.7 million because who wants to work for free?
Did you know that more than 100,000 Detroiters work outside the city? Many of these need reliable mass transit to get to these jobs. This is a crisis. I am asking that you please add $400,000 to DDOT, as so many Detroiters rely on it to get to suburban jobs.
and so that people like Mr. Robertson don't have to walk 21 miles to and from work. Thank you.
So I got to pretend that I was a councilwoman and looked at the city's budget and saw how much money we had to use. I learned that there is definitely lots of need though in the community, that people between the police departments and the fire departments and all the various needs that city employees have and that city residents have, and that it takes a lot of careful decision making to decide who is going to get to use what part of the city's budget.
Other people should definitely participate in this just because they don't understand how hard it is to try to manage this money and how hard it is to work with what they already have and what they don't have. So once they enter this program, Citizen Detroit, that way they'll understand that with the money that you have, you can still do what you need to get done and do what you need to do.
Because it's not easy trying to run a city, and like there's many different voices, so there's a lot of disagreements and agreements. So it's a good opportunity to teach me how to get along with different people that have different voices.
I think it showed me how much everybody wants money and how little there is to give to everybody.
Yeah, I learned a lot here today. I learned how difficult it is to work with such a limited amount of money, and how you can't please everyone, but you try to do what you can, and how, you know, the citizens may judge those who are in council and everything without knowing all of the facts. So it's important to know what you're mad about.
The message that we should be giving to youth in the city is that their voice matters, that their opinion matters. We should be engaging with them as in many ways as possible, forming groups, youth councils, citywide youth councils for each district.
We were awarded a Night Cities Challenge grant to celebrate young people turning 18 and first becoming eligible to vote by sending them a birthday package in the mail. We call it the Happy 18th Birthday Local Citizenship Kit. And it brings together a few different things. One, our Citizen Detroit participants really wanted us to be engaging young people. We also wanted to celebrate young people and the importance of their voice and engagement in civic life. And, you know, because of research that said young people are more likely to vote if you ask them to, that more contact with them about engaging in civic life makes them more likely to do so. And so if someone already cares about the quality of their education or feeling safe walking down the street, and we can make a link between that issue that they care about and what impact this or that elected official or city department has on that issue, then that can get the person more interested in an election or in how city government works.
Public education in Detroit is at a crossroads, in my opinion. I am a student of history and a scholar of history as well. So what's going on in the city, I have a fervent understanding to a certain extent. I know that, you know, population decline and disinvestment has played a large role. I also know that education in the city is taking a turn, and in my opinion, it's no coincidence that the students that are affected in DPS look a certain way. They're from a certain socioeconomic background, and I think that in our state, students who come from those kind of backgrounds and are from those socioeconomic backgrounds will suffer because of who's been in power. They have a different perspective on what they see as solutions for urban environments and urban districts, and I think that's been a part of what's been the reason why we're at that crossroads and not trending in the right direction.
I think that there's a lot of people who they either feel that their vote won't matter, they feel that they have a negative view of elected officials, you know, a perception that you know, people in office don't listen to people, don't fulfill their promises, and maybe it doesn't matter ultimately who they vote for. They're not going to get the result they want anyway. That's what I've heard, is my vote doesn't count, it doesn't matter, and the people I vote for aren't going to listen to me anyway when they're in office. And of course, you know, hopefully that's not true, but I think that's a perception that some people have at least.
We are doing this, of course, across the political districts in the city as well.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, you hit one group seniors. What about young people? If we're going to talk about changing attitudes and what they want in terms of information to make decisions, how might we approach that?
I think getting in the communities and really just listening, because a lot of our young people feel like they've been talked down to a lot, and they come from environments at home where they've been beaten down by family members who don't want to see them do better than them, or it's like any victory you have, no one's there to help celebrate with you. So a lot of times, most of it just comes from getting in the community, listening, and then seeing how you can use the talents, because everyone has different talents. Right. And I tell people, they ask me all the time, how can I help with the revival of the city? Yeah. And I said, just come and listen.
I'm involved in my community by taking people to vote. I'm involved as far as getting out to help clean the community. I do Angels Night. So I do things that help escalate and to bring awareness to the good city that we live in.
I was part of that change that recognized that we didn't have Black Studies programs. And I was part of that change where we closed down our school to gain Black Studies, because we had, on one hand, very responsive and engaging teachers, and we had others that just really didn't understand the struggle for self-determination and high standards. And so consequently, that was one of the changes. And then we began to see in some of the other schools, particularly as we talked to our friends, a real decline in the expectations of staff. We saw a decline in the opportunities to go to college. I can say definitively, most of my friends who were African American didn't have the benefit, including my experience at Cass. My counselor never asked me, did I intend to go to college? Never. On the other hand, my white friends all had opportunities to sit down with their counselors. So those kind of subtle to very blatant differences, both based upon race and gender and ethnicity, were already playing out.
The purpose of Citizen Detroit is to educate the population about their own democracy, how to engage each other, how to engage their representatives, how to engage the candidates for positions as they are looking. We recently had a school board election. What questions do you ask the 96 or some odd candidates who are running for the school board? What questions do you ask 5 or 6 candidates running for a single at-large position on city council? And you need to know that as you are discussing things locally, you need to make sure that your representatives are attuned to those things. That's how it's possible for these issues to converge from a national level to a local level.
And then lastly, school quality is poor across the whole landscape. And so let's take a look at the academics. This is a chart that shows you the number of schools above average and below average on MEEP, so the state's, not the same assessment that Ms. Ridgway was talking about, but the state's MEEP assessment, which of course we're no longer using, but we just moved away from a few years ago. Red is below the state average and green is above the state average. Remarkably few green circles and squares and diamonds on that chart, and an overwhelming number of red ones. And in the interest of time, I'm not showing you trend data, but I could show you trend data, and the trend data would tell you that things are not getting better, right? That we've flatlined really at an awful state of affairs for our kids.
I think the Citizen Detroit series is a great concept. It probably would have been helpful pre-bankruptcy, so people, would have had the opportunity to get a chance to better understand municipal government, the services that they provide, et cetera. But, I've enjoyed every session. I think the citizens, they bring a different perspective that as a county administrator or a municipal administrator, you don't necessarily get every day kind of in the office. So it's good to actually hear directly from voters and see what's really important to them. And then even more important than that, you try to put together the correlation between the work you can actually do and the services and the desires of their heart that they actually need.
I think one of the critical ways to answer the question, why is a program like Citizen Detroit necessary and vital to the democratic life of the city, it's literally an axiom, it seems to me, that people make informed decisions when they have good information. One of the things that was existing in the political culture then, and is even worse today, is this whole idea that facts don't matter, and that you can interpret the world through your lens using whatever set of ideas and facts you want to. That is as corrosive to democracy as anything else. The platform that makes democracy work is that there's a shared set of facts and a hopefully shared set of values, but the facts have to matter.
So most of us think all of these things are important. You got to pick one. There is no all the above. We're forcing you to identify your priority.
The goals and the way we implement the exercises make all the difference in the world. People constantly tell us how impressed they are with the degree of organization, the degree of follow-up, the consistency with which we operate, the brilliance of our leadership, the detail that we take into account with everything we do. We feed people entire dinners, we facilitate each event, we train our facilitators, and we encourage them with the stipends.
So I attended a Citizen Detroit event in the summer of 2015. I was a fellow in the Michigan Political Leadership Program through Michigan State University, and I had a fantastic experience. We were in downtown Detroit, which is always a wonderful place to be. We had a group of 24 fellows, some other staff from MSU, and had a panel discussion with local leaders. And it was really wonderful. I enjoyed the experience, I learned a lot, was able to ask some important questions, and just enjoyed the overall vibe. So I think it was a very positive experience.
I'm here because I believe civic engagement's important. I believe that people in place have a natural, intimate relationship that needs to be fostered by people engaging with the place that they're in, not just taking up space, but contributing to its value.
It was energetic, it was fun. Being able to talk with other people and kind of engage in the strategy and talk about what was going on in Detroit, and being able to have different opinions and kind of have those conversations was, it was good, it was great. I really enjoyed it. It was a good experience.
Take Citizen Detroit to the neighborhoods. Take Citizen Detroit to the housing projects. Take Citizen Detroit to neighborhood centers. And that too, being right there in the community, I think will be another incredible kind of thing you can do, as well as I think the whole use of social media is going to be extremely important. You'll be able to get out a lot more information, and we can tweet about what's important.
To get people more involved in elections, I'm a strong believer in making it as accessible as possible. I'm a strong believer in a person being able to vote right in their living room. I mean, I think it's time that we seriously consider looking at the television as a voting tool, looking at the television as a tool for getting one's opinion expressed. I mean, we do it now with cell phones, which is one step beyond the television, but we're so electronically engaged now. I think that, that the whole notion of going where people are is to address now the electronic medias and moving voting in that.
I think a superintendent that comes to any urban district should have a background of showing how they move the academics to a different level. They should have a background of fiscal responsibility, a background of being able to communicate with all parties that are involved, parents, the board members, the administration, the teachers. They should be a visionary leader to say which way it should go and work with those groups. They should not be a diplomat, a person who dictates. They should be a person who's open to meet with all groups to say, I'm listening to all, and this is how we're going to make it work in this particular system by taking all opinions and advice. They should have an open door policy that they're willing to work with the community.
I've long believed that democracy is not just something that we have, it's something that we have to do, and we have to take an active role in it, and the best way to do that is to be informed and to have information and a framework to make good decisions. And I think that is at the core of what Citizen Detroit has been about, and I love that it is hyper-local. I love that it digs into not just the mayor or city council, but also ballot initiatives and the school board race and the state legislature races. And so I think it's both filling a void that in a way has been created by the shrinkage of the local newspaper market, but also creating a very new dialogue about how individual citizens can engage and navigate the complexity of government.
The level of knowledge that residents have about how you fund pensions, what it means if bad pensions decisions get made, what it means if you, as a local government, take essentially a credit card to pay a credit card. These are ideas that our facilitators have become very comfortable with, and when they get those aha moments from a citizen where it's like, wow, I really didn't understand how tough this was, that's fulfilling. It's sharing knowledge, it's sharing information. It is truly building a community, and it's building democracy. The more informed people are, the more vibrant and vital your local democracy can be.
Making real change in Detroit, particularly as the city continues its progress toward financial recovery, is no easy task. But we wanted to show that there is a valuable role for a movement of citizen engagement whereby citizens grapple with the same problems that their leaders face. They may not have the experience of elected leaders, but they have the passion and the interest. Citizen Detroit is showing that if groups of citizens are brought together and given a chance to reach consensus on a variety of issues, they may elevate their participation in their democracy.
I think this is an important piece for everybody to understand their civic responsibility, their financial responsibility, and their overall responsibility to humanity as a whole. So if we do this with first graders, second graders, third graders, especially high schoolers, they would understand the city that they live in, the city they want to raise their children in, and the city that they love, and how it is taken care of, and what their responsibilities are to it, both politically and personally.
We believe that when this happens, it will be because citizens become engaged in new ways of working together toward common goals. That is to say, when we all have become true partners in democracy. Again, I'm Irvin D. Reed, and on behalf of Sheila Cockrell and myself, we wish you the very best in creating your own civic engagement program.